The morning Seth Yates found the orc woman collapsed against his fence post. He nearly mistook her for a deer caught in the wire, until she lifted her head and fixed him with eyes the deep, burnished gold of harvest wheat, and every thought he had ever held about the world rearranged itself without asking permission. Seth had been awake since well before the sun cracked over the Ironback Ridge, the way he had been every morning for the past 2 years, ever since his father had died and left him the 40-acre spread on the edge of Ashveil Territory with nothing but a deed, a broken plow, and a cellar half full of root vegetables. He was 26 years old and felt every one of those years in his shoulders by midday. The farm was not failing, but it was not flourishing either, and the line between those two things felt thinner every season. He needed help. He had posted a hand-wanted notice on the board outside Hobbs' trading post 3 weeks running, and nobody had come. Nobody with 2 working arms and a willingness to haul fence posts and break ground wanted to drive 4 hours out to a border farm when there were cleaner jobs in Veldwick proper. So he had been trudging toward the eastern fence line in the gray pre-dawn light, a coil of wire over one shoulder and a bucket of tools hanging from his fist when he saw her. She was sitting, barely, more slumping than sitting, with her back against the corner post, her long legs stretched out in the frost-stiffened grass, her head lolling against the weathered wood. She wore a fitted leather bodice the color of dark ochre, laced tight over a deep green linen shirt that clung to her figure beneath it, the laces loose at the collarbone where the shirt opened in a modest V. Her trousers were dark and snug, tucked into knee-high travel boots that had seen hard miles. The left one had a strip of rawhide wrapped around the ankle where the leather had started to split. A belt cinched her waist with a brass buckle shaped like a running wolf, and from it hung an empty knife sheath, the blade long gone. Her skin was the deep, living green of moss after rain, and her black hair was thick and tangled, matted with dried mud at the temple where a cut had bled and clotted. Her lower canines rose just slightly past her full lips, and even in unconsciousness her jaw held a kind of proud, unyielding architecture that made Seth think, even then, that this was not a woman the world had treated gently and that she had refused to let it diminish her anyway. He set the wire down slowly and crouched in front of her. "Hey," he said, his voice low the way he kept it around spooked horses. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her gold eyes opened. Just a crack, then fully, and they locked on him with an alertness that told him whatever else was wrong with her, her mind was sharp. "Don't," she said. Her voice was rough as gravel but measured. "Don't call anyone." "I wasn't going to," Seth said, which was the truth. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her calculating, measuring the distance between them, measuring the tools in the bucket, deciding how fast she could move if she had to. Her right hand had been resting at her hip where the knife sheath was, and the fingers twitched before she caught herself. "You are on a farm," she said. "That's right, my farm. You came onto my land overnight, looks like." "I will go." She shifted, tried to push herself upright, and the effort went wrong. Her face tightened and she dropped back against the post with a barely controlled grunt. She was hurt, more than just the cut on her head. Her left arm was pulled close to her body in the particular way people held limbs that had been abused. Seth sat back on his heels. He could walk away. He could go back to the farmhouse and pretend he had not seen her, and she would be gone or dead by noon, and he would never know which. He had heard the rumors coming out of Ashveil, that a clan had broken apart, that the Stormbound had fractured after their war chief died, that its warriors and women had scattered into the border territory with nowhere to go and no safe passage to anywhere that would take them. He had heard what happened to orc women caught alone in the territory without clan marks or papers. He had seen the iron collars at the Veldwick market. He picked up the bucket of tools and stood. "Come on," he said. "My house is a 1/4 mile. Can you walk?" The gold eyes went narrow. "Why?" "Because you are hurt and it is 30 degrees this morning and I have a fire inside. I am orc." "I noticed," Seth said without heat. "That doesn't change what I just said." The silence between them stretched. A crow called somewhere in the elm line along the north pasture. Finally, Mazoga Stormbound put her good hand flat on the frost-hard ground and pushed herself to her feet. She was tall. She cleared Seth 6 feet by a solid 2 inches, and when she straightened she held herself with a precision that was clearly costing her something, but she held it. She did not want pity. He filed that away. "I walk on my own," she said. "Suit yourself," said Seth, and turned toward the farmhouse, trusting she would follow. She did. The farmhouse was a long, low-ceilinged log structure that Seth had rebuilt in pieces over the 2 years since inheriting it. The south wall was new pine, pale against the old dark timber of the rest. There was a covered porch with a pair of mismatched chairs, and inside the front door the main room held a large stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, a washstand, and the organized clutter of a working farm hanging herbs, coiled rope, seed pouches, a row of hooks with coats and hats, and a leather-worked rifle sling. The fire was low but alive, and Seth fed it before he did anything else. Mazoga stood just inside the door, not touching anything, watching him. "Sit," he said, nodding at the bench beside the hearth. "Please." She sat on the very edge of it, spine straight, feet flat, ready. Seth heated water, found the cloth he used for wound washing, and set it on the table beside the wooden box where he kept his medical supplies: needle, thread, dried yarrow, a small clay pot of rendered tallow he mixed with dried calendula for infections. He was not a trained healer, but border farms made you learn. He turned to her. "I need to look at your arm," he said, "and that cut on your head. I won't touch you without permission." Another long calculation in those gold eyes. "The arm is not broken," she said, "only the shoulder. It was pulled from the socket 2 days ago. I pushed it back." Seth kept his face neutral, though he felt the flinch of it internally. "You set your own shoulder. There was no one else." He nodded. "Okay, head wound then, may I?" She tilted her head slightly to the right, allowing it. He cleaned the cut with care, working in silence, and when she made no sound, even as he pressed against what had to be a tender bruise along her cheekbone, he did not comment on it. He applied the calendula tallow, pressed a clean pad of linen against the cut, and tied it in place with a strip torn from an old shirt. "You have done this before," she said, watching him with a clinical curiosity. "I've got 40 acres and the nearest doctor is in Veldwick. You learn. Why are you helping me?" He set the cloth down and looked at her directly. "Because you needed it. That is not a reason most humans give orcs." "Then most humans are making a mistake," Seth said simply. He moved away to the fire and swung the kettle over the hook. "I've got oat porridge from this morning, and I can brew pine needle tea, which won't taste like much, but it has got warmth in it. You hungry?" She was. He saw it in the minute shift of her expression. The way her chin dropped the tiniest fraction, as if some protective brace inside her had just loosened 1 degree. She was starving, and she had been trying very hard not to show it. "Yes," she said quietly. He served her without ceremony, a deep bowl and a full cup, and he sat across the table with his own and ate alongside her so she would not feel watched. Outside the window the sun was coming up behind the ridge, slow and cold and amber, laying long shadows across the field. "I am Mazoga," she said after the bowl was half empty. "Mazoga Stormbound." "Seth Yates," he said. "This is my farm, was my father's." "Stormbound is a clan name," she said. "It is also a name I carry alone now." She said it matter-of-factly, the way you state a wound that has already closed. "The clan is gone." "I heard there was trouble in Ashveil," Seth said carefully. "Our war chief died without a named heir, and the elders could not agree, and the peace broke from the inside." She set her spoon down. "I was a keeper, a memory keeper, not a warrior. When the clan broke, the warriors took the land and the provisions, and those of us who were not fighters had to find our own way." "And your way brought you here," Seth said. "My way brought me to your fence post," she said. "I did not plan further than that." He looked at her for a moment, this tall, green-skinned woman with the gold eyes and the matted hair and the set-back shoulder and the empty knife sheath, sitting at his table eating his porridge and telling him her whole world had fallen apart with the calm delivery of someone reporting weather conditions. Something moved in his chest that he could not name quite yet. It felt like recognition. "I posted a hand-wanted notice at Hobbs Trading Post," he said, 3 weeks ago. Never got any takers. Her eyes came up slowly. You are offering me work. I'm saying my farm needs a hand, and you need a reason to stay somewhere safe while your shoulder heals. Those two things fit together if you want them to. Mazoga stared at him. The fire popped. The morning light stretched further across the floorboards. I have no clan seal, she said. No papers. If anyone from Veldwick comes, I'll handle Veldwick, Seth said. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, he said evenly. I'm saying this farm is mine and what I do on it is my business, and I'd like your help if you'll give it. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet, but a softening the way stone softens when water has worked at it long enough. She picked her spoon back up. I will think about it, she said. Fair enough, said Seth, and poured her more tea. She stayed. It was not an immediate, dramatic declaration of intention. It was more that 3 days passed and then a week, and with each passing day Mazoga did one more thing. She split the wood pile when her shoulder was healed enough to swing an axe, slowly at first and then with increasing power. She fixed the latch on the cellar door that Seth had been meaning to fix for 6 months. She cleaned and rehung the drying herbs in proper order, and when Seth found them, he stood in the doorway looking at the neat bundles for a long moment, and felt something warm and confused all at once. She slept in the barn the first week, which he protested. The loft is dry and there is a good blanket up there, she said, before he could offer her the house's second room. I'm not comfortable inside walls yet. He understood that better than she might have expected. He had spent 3 weeks sleeping under his wagon when he first came to the farm, needing to know the land before he could settle into a building. So he dragged an extra quilt out to the barn and hung a lantern from the rafter hook and did not push it. But by the second week, when a late-season cold snap came down off the ironbacks with a ferocity that sugared the pasture with ice and made the barn boards creak in the night, Seth woke to find the farmhouse door open and Mazoga sitting in the chair by the dead fire, her arms wrapped around herself, and a look on her face that was stubbornly determined not to admit she was freezing. He added wood to the fire without a word. He went back to his room, found his second heaviest blanket, and brought it out. I am not accepting charity, she said. I know, he said. This is a trade. I don't want to lose my farmhand to pneumonia, so you're taking the blanket. She looked at him for a moment with those gold eyes, and then she took the blanket and wrapped it around herself. And when he checked 20 minutes later, she was asleep in the chair with her head tipped back, and the first truly restful expression he had seen on her face in the 2 weeks she had been here. He stood in the doorway and watched her breathe for a moment, and then went to bed feeling something in his chest that was complicated and warm and quietly alarming. The second week bled into the third, and the third into the full arrival of winter, and by then there was a rhythm to the farm that Seth had not experienced since before his father got sick. Mazoga rose before he did. He would come downstairs in the dawn and find the fire already built, and the coffee pot on the hook if he had beans, and sometimes a hunk of the dense rye bread she had started making from his flour stores set on the table beside a cloth-wrapped piece of hard cheese. It was not a performance of domesticity. She simply did what needed doing, efficiently and without drama, and the farm noticed. The eastern fence line was fully repaired before the ground froze solid. The root cellar was reorganized and restocked with the dried goods she suggested they barter for from Hobbs, a trip she did not come on herself, not yet, but she gave Seth a list written in the careful, deliberate script of someone formally educated, which surprised him and did not surprise him all at once, because she had told him she was a memory keeper, and memory keepers, he was learning, held their clan's history, their medicine, their agreements, their traditions in written and oral form. She was not simply literate, she was learned. You can read clan script, he asked, looking at the list. And common tongue and the trade pidgin used in the northern passes, she said without inflection. Memory keepers learn all the languages of the lands their clan moves through. It is how we keep the contracts intact. That's remarkable, Seth said. Mazoga looked at him with a brief, searching expression as if checking whether the compliment was genuine or patronizing. She seemed to decide it was genuine. "It is necessary," she said, but she stood slightly straighter. It was on the fourth week that the first real trouble came, and it arrived in the form of 3 men on horseback coming up the wagon trail to the farm just before noon on a Tuesday, when Seth was in the south field and Mazoga was splitting firewood by the barn. Seth heard the horses and looked up. He recognized one of the men, Corvin Dale, who ran a labor brokerage out of Veldwick and had a reputation for methods that sat uncomfortably close to the edge of legal. The other 2 were men he did not know, large and unhurried on their horses, with the watchful ease of men accustomed to being the ones who caused trouble. Seth started walking toward the farmyard, keeping his pace even. He arrived at the same moment as the horses, and he stepped in front of Mazoga with his body between her and the riders before he consciously decided to do it. The movement was instinct, and it was not missed by any of the 4 people watching. Corvin Dale pushed back the brim of his hat and looked down at Seth with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Yates. I hear you got yourself an orc problem." "I've got an orc farmhand," Seth said. "That's different from a problem." "Town doesn't see it that way." Corvin's eyes slid to Mazoga, still holding the axe, her jaw set like iron. "She've got papers." "She's got my word," Seth said. "Which on my land counts for more?" "Your land is 4 miles from the Ashveil border, and the territory marshal has a standing inquiry on Stormbound clan remnants. You're harboring." "I'm employing," Seth said. "She works for me. I pay her. That's employment, not harboring, and I'll argue that point with the marshal himself if I need to." Corvin studied him for a long moment. Then he looked past him at Mazoga again, and something in his gaze had the particular quality of a man deciding what something was worth in coin, and Seth felt his jaw tighten. "Set a fair price, Yates. She works the brokerage line, you get 20 silver. She's not for sale," Seth said. His voice went quiet in a way that the horses seemed to notice, because the nearest one shifted its feet. "She is a free woman working a free contract on my land. You ride back to Veldwick and tell whoever sent you that I said so, and if they've got a legal complaint they can bring it in writing to a magistrate." The second of the men, a broad, stubbled fellow, spat into the frost. "You want to watch yourself, farm boy. Orc friend ain't a title that keeps you warm at night in this territory." "It'll keep me warmer than you're going to be comfortable with," Seth said. He had not reached for the rifle slung on his back. He did not need to yet. But his hand was near his hip, and Corvin Dale had enough experience reading situations to understand he was not looking at a man who would back down. The horses turned. They rode back down the wagon trail without another word, and Seth stood watching until they rounded the tree line and disappeared. Then he turned around. Mazoga was still holding the axe. Her knuckles had gone the gray-green of deep stress, and her gold eyes were fixed on him with an expression he could not fully read. It was somewhere between stunned and fierce, and somewhere else underneath both of those things that she was working very hard to keep below the surface. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Seth said. "They will come back. Men like that always come back." "Maybe," Seth said, "and when they do, we'll handle it then." He turned toward the barn. "Fence posts won't move themselves. You want to finish splitting that wood, or should we swap?" After a very long beat, he heard the crack of the axe behind him. He did not let her see the long breath he let out. That night after supper, a thick soup Mazoga had made from dried beans and the last of the autumn carrots, richer and more complex in flavor than anything Seth could have managed with the same ingredients. She sat across from him at the table and did not speak for a while. The fire was high. The wind had come back down off the ridge, rattling the window shutters, and it was the kind of night that made the world outside feel very far away and the warm room feel very earned. "What is a memory keeper?" Seth asked after a while. Mazoga set her wooden cup down on the table. She considered the question with the same careful weight she gave everything, and then she said, "In the Stormbound clan, the memory keeper holds all the things a people cannot afford to lose. The birth records, the boundary agreements, the old songs, the medicine knowledge, the treaties, the stories of the dead." She looked into the fire. When a clan has no memory keeper, they lose the shape of themselves over time. They stop knowing who they are. What happens to a memory keeper when the clan is gone? A long pause. They carry it alone, she said, until there is somewhere to put it. Seth turned his cup in his hands. Do you still remember it all, your clan's history? Every word, she said, and there was something in how she said it, a weight and a grief and a dignity all at once, like someone describing a scar that is also a badge. Then it isn't lost, Seth said. It's just waiting. Mazoga looked at him then directly with the full force of those golden eyes, and he held the look without flinching or looking away, and the fire crackled between them, and something that had been quietly building since the first morning she walked across the frost-stiff field behind him shifted upward into a new register, warm and complicated and very, very present. You are not what I expected, she said softly. When I came to your fence, I expected you to call for the marshal. I expected, she stopped. What? Chains, she said simply. Seth set his cup down and looked at her steadily. There are no chains on this farm, he said, and there never will be while I'm on it. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was the silence of something settling, the sound a stone makes when it finds its place in a wall and stops shifting. December came with its full weight and the farm buckled down with it. The fields were locked under frost and there was no plowing to be done. But winter was its own kind of labor, keeping the water lines from freezing, breaking ice on the animal troughs twice a day, hauling wood from the stack, mending inside by firelight, preparing the equipment for spring. Seth and Mazoga fell into the rhythm of it with a naturalness that neither of them remarked on, because to remark on it would have been to examine it, and examining it might have made both of them nervous about how good it felt. She moved into the second bedroom in the third week of December. She did not announce this. She simply stopped going to the barn at night, and one morning her blanket and the small pack of personal items she carried were arranged neatly on the second room's shelf and her boots were by the second room's door. Seth walked past and saw it and felt something open in him like a window on the first warm morning of spring. He did not say anything. But that evening he brought a candle to put on the shelf in her room, a good tallow candle in a clay holder that had been his mother's, and he set it on the edge of the shelf and looked at it for a moment, and then he went back to the main room. She used it every night. He could see the light under her door. It was in January that he first really touched her, not the cautious clinical contact of wound care, something else. She had been checking the root cellar, and the lid pulley had broken, the heavy door swinging back and catching her across the knuckles of her right hand with enough force to split two of them open. She came inside with her hand wrapped in her shirt hem, unconcerned as ever, and Seth took her hand in both of his without asking and held it toward the lantern light to look at the cuts. Her hand was large and strong and green and warm, and the knuckles were bleeding freely, and Seth held it with both of his and cleaned it and wrapped it in clean linen, and the whole time he was aware extremely, quietly, deeply aware of the warmth of her skin against his palms, and of the way she was watching his face from a distance of maybe 12 inches, studying him with those harvest gold eyes while he worked. You do not find me strange to look at, she said after a while. You're beautiful to look at, Seth said without thinking, and then he felt the back of his neck go hot and he kept his eyes on the bandaging. The silence that followed was full. You meant that, she said finally, careful and wondering. Yes, he said, still not looking up. His hands had stopped moving. He was just holding her wrapped hand now, both of his around it, and neither of them was doing anything about that. I did. He heard her exhale, not quite a breath, something shorter than a breath, like the sound of a door catching on a hinge. Seth, she said. He looked up. She was very close. The lamplight was making gold of everything. The already gold of her eyes doubled and deepened, and her expression had dropped every single one of its walls, all the careful calculations and the measured distances, and what he was looking at in the absence of all that was something enormous and unguarded and so nakedly hopeful that it nearly stole his footing. He did not move. He did not want to frighten this. You have been kind to me, she said, from the first morning. I have been trying to understand what you want in return." "Nothing," Seth said quietly. "I want nothing back, I just want you to be here." "Why?" she said, and it came out very soft, not suspicious, not defended, just genuinely asking. A woman who had been counted a liability and a burden, and a problem her entire adult life, genuinely asking the man in front of her why he considered her a gift instead. "Because," he said, with the honest helplessness of a man who is only beginning to understand his own heart, "the farm is better with you on it. And I am better with you on it. And I think you know that, but I don't think anyone said it to you before, and that seems like something worth fixing." Mazoga looked at him for a long, full moment, and then she turned her head away slightly, and he saw her swallow, and he understood that she was moved in a way she did not yet know how to show without coming apart at the seams, and the tenderness he felt for her in that moment was so large it was almost frightening. He gently set her wrapped hand down on the table, patted it once, and stood. "Get some rest," he said. "That hand needs to be still tonight." "Seth," she said again, and when he looked back, she was watching him with the firelight in her eyes and something luminous and new in her expression. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," he said, with a small smile. "Roof needs re-shingling in the spring, and I'll need your arms for it." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He went to his room carrying the warmth of it like a coal in a tin cup, and he lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and understood, with a clarity that surprised him not at all, that he was falling completely in love with her. January into February. The world outside the farm was white and locked, and inside it there was fire and food, and the growing gravitational pull of two people occupying the same space, and finding it more right than wrong. They talked by the fire every evening. He told her about growing up on this land, about his father who was hard and fair in equal parts, about his mother who died when Seth was 11, about the loneliness of inheriting something unfinished. She told him, piece by piece, about the Stormbound clan, the encampments along the Greywater River in summer, the winter halls dug into the hillsides, the ceremonies she had memorized and now kept inside herself like a living archive, the war songs and the harvest songs and the names of the dead. She told him about her mother, who had been a memory keeper before her, and who had died in the 3rd year of the Territory Wars when Mazoga was 19, and how she had taken the role from grief and love and the fierce refusal to let the knowledge die with its keeper. She had been a memory keeper for 7 years. She had been alone for 1. She told him these things slowly, not all at once, as if she was deciding each piece was safe before offering the next, and he received them all with the same quiet attention and never used them carelessly. And with each piece she trusted him with. Something in him understood that he was being given something more precious than he had words for, the private, hard-won interior of a person who had never before found anyone safe enough to show it to. He told her things he had not told anyone. About the debt on the farm and the fear that he would lose it. About the nights in the 1st year when the loneliness was so heavy he had sat on the porch with his father's rifle across his knees just to feel like someone was keeping watch. About the way he had not let himself want anything beyond the farm's survival because wanting felt like the enemy of survival. "That is not living," Mazoga said one night, direct and unhesitant. "That is holding position against dying. It is not the same thing." "No," Seth admitted. "It's not." "You should want things," she said, and she said it looking at him with a directness that made the fire feel warmer than it was. "I'm starting to," he said. They did not move toward each other that night. But the space between them had thinned, and they both knew it, and neither of them was afraid of it. The real test of the winter came in late February, when a letter arrived at the farm via a boy from Hobbs Trading Post. 2 cold miles on a pony for a boy of maybe 12 who handed over the sealed paper with the particular solemn importance children give to things they know are serious but don't quite understand. Seth gave him a coin and a strip of dried apple, and the boy rode back down the trail, and Seth broke the seal. The letter was from the Ashveil Territory Marshal's office. It informed him, in the cold, bureaucratic language of official threat, that he was required to present himself at the Veldwick courthouse no later than the 1st of March, to answer a formal inquiry regarding the harboring of an unregistered and unclaimed orc individual on his property, said individual being potentially connected to a Stormbound clan disbandment investigation, and that failure to appear would result in a property warrant. Seth read the letter twice. Then he folded it and set it on the table. Mazoga was watching him from across the room. "It is about me," she said. "It was not a question. It's a formal inquiry," he said. "They want me to appear in Veldwick by the 1st of March. She stood up. Her expression had gone very still, and he recognized the particular stillness. She was preparing for what she believed was coming, and what she believed was coming was him turning to her and saying he was sorry but she needed to go. "I will leave tonight," she said. "Before the weather breaks, it will be better for you." "You're not leaving," Seth said. "Seth, sit down, Mazoga." The command was gentle but completely firm, and she stopped moving. She looked at him. "I'm going to Veldwick on the 28th, he said. "And I'm going to stand in front of their magistrate and state my lawful case for employing you, and I am going to make clear that you are under my protection on this land." He looked at her steadily. "Now, is there anything in your situation, papers you need, any legal piece I should know about, that we should address before I go?" She stared at him for a long moment, and then she crossed to the table and sat down very carefully, as if the chair might not be real and she didn't want to fall through it. "I have my clan's original boundary charter," she said. "Memory keepers carry the founding documents. It names the Stormbound clan as signatories to the Greywater Accord of 7 years ago. That accord grants clan members freedom of movement in the border territories." "That's a legal document," Seth said. "Yes." "Then I'm taking it with me. You're going to write me a summary of your role as memory keeper and sign it, and I'm going to take that too." She went to the small pack under her bed and produced a rolled leather document case, sealed with a brass cap and a clan-marked clasp. She handled it with the care of someone carrying something alive. She opened it on the table and unrolled the charter, and Seth leaned over to look at it, a document in 3 languages, ink darkened with age but clear and intact, bearing the seal of the territorial magistrate from 7 years back, and beside it the mark of the Stormbound clan war chief. "This is solid," he said. "This is real legal weight. Will they honor it?" "If the magistrate in Veldwick has any interest in staying a magistrate, yes," Seth said. "These things go bad for people who ignore signed accords." He looked up at her. "You've been carrying this for a year and you didn't use it." "I did not know anyone who would receive it honestly," she said, very quietly. "Corvin Dale's people tried to take it from me the night before I came to your fence. That is how my shoulder was injured. I fought them and ran." Seth sat back. The cold fury that moved through him was calm, which was how he knew it was serious. "Then we're going to make sure that never happens again," he said. On the 28th of February, Seth Yates rode into Veldwick on his roan horse with Mazoga's clan charter and her signed statement in his saddlebag. He left Mazoga at the farm with the doors bolted, and the understanding that he would be back by nightfall. And she stood on the porch and watched him ride away with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her gold eyes following him until the ridge swallowed the trail. Veldwick was a frontier town of maybe 400 people, a main street of timber frame buildings, a trading post and a blacksmith and a tavern, and a courthouse built from river stone that was trying, not entirely successfully, to project legal authority. Seth tied his horse outside the courthouse and went in. The magistrate was a woman of 60 named Hargrove, who had the leathery patience of someone who had lived on the border long enough to lose most of her illusions. She read the documents Seth presented, including the Greywater Accord, with a care that told him she was genuinely reading them, and when she finished she set them down and looked at him over her spectacles. "This accord is valid," she said. "I recognize the seal. Then I would like my farmhand status confirmed as legal and protected under Article 4 of that accord, which covers clan remnant individuals in border territories," Seth said. Hargrove studied him. You've done your reading. I asked around, Seth said. Corvin Dale is going to be unhappy. Corvin Dale's feelings about the law are not the law's concern, Seth said. A pause. Then Hargrove wrote something on official paper, stamped it with the courthouse seal, and slid it across the desk. Your farmhand is confirmed as a legally employed individual under your household registration, protected under the Greywater Accord, she said. Anyone who interferes with that can take it up with this office. She looked at him steadily. You understand what you're taking on. The town has opinions. The town can keep them, Seth said. He rode home with the stamped paper in his breast pocket and arrived at the farm as the sun was dropping behind the ridge, turning the western sky the deep orange and violet of a bruise healing into something beautiful. Mazoga was not on the porch. He tied his horse and pushed open the front door. She was standing by the fire with a wooden spoon in her hand and soup on the hook, and when he came in, she turned and looked at him, and her whole body asked the question before her mouth did. He pulled the courthouse paper from his pocket and held it up. She crossed the room in 3 steps and took it from him, and she read it carefully, reading every word. And when she had finished, she held it against her chest for a moment with her eyes closed, and Seth watched the long exhale move through her like a wave through deep water, the releasing of something she had been carrying since before she fell against his fence post. When she opened her eyes, they were bright, not with tears exactly, but with something adjacent to tears, something that looked like relief so large it had no better expression. You did this, she said. You had the accord, Seth said. I just walked it to the right desk. You did not have to, she said. And she said it the way she had said it by the fence that first morning. But this time there was no wariness in it, only the wonder of someone who had learned, against all their previous experience, that some people did things because they wanted to. Mazoga, Seth said, and his voice was lower than he intended, and she was very close, and he had been up since before dawn and had been tense and cold and focused for 12 hours, and he was home now, and she was here, and none of the careful distances felt necessary anymore. Thank you, she said, and she put her free hand against his chest, over the breast pocket where the paper had been, her palm flat over his heartbeat, and looked up at him with those enormous golden eyes, and Seth Yates, who had been very careful with himself for 26 years, put his hand over hers and bent his head and kissed her. It was a slow kiss, soft and careful and deliberate, the kind of kiss that knows it is the first of many and wants to honor that. Her breath caught against his lips, and then she kissed him back, warm and certain, her hand turning under his to hold it rather than be held, and the soup on the fire kept bubbling and the fire kept burning, and outside the night came down over the Ironback Ridge, and inside the farmhouse on the eastern edge of the Ashveil Territory, something was born that had never existed in that place before. They pulled back after a long moment and looked at each other, and she looked undone in the best possible way. All that precise composure softened, and he was fairly certain he looked exactly the same. I've wanted to do that for a while, he admitted. I know, she said. I have been watching you want to and not wanting to startle you by wanting it back. He laughed a real laugh, surprised and warm, and she smiled. And her smile was extraordinary, the slight uplift of those full lips, the glint of her lower canines, the way her whole face changed with it, the way it lit the gold in her eyes. He felt like a man seeing the sun come up for the first time and understanding, with sudden embarrassed wonder, that it had been there the whole time. March came, and with it the thaw. The fields softened and the rivers ran fast with snowmelt, and there was an enormous amount of work to do. But the work was different now. Not the solitary, grinding work of a man trying to hold his father's land together against entropy, but a shared labor with a rhythm, and a satisfaction that Seth had not known farming could have. Mazoga plowed alongside him, her strength matching and often exceeding his on the heavier pulls, and she had a farmer's instinct for soil and drainage and planting schedules that she said came from the clan's agricultural memory. 7 generations of stormbound planting knowledge living in her head. Your topsoil in the North Field is exhausted, she told him one morning, crouching to lift a fist of earth and work it between her fingers. 2 more seasons like the last and you will get nothing from it. You need to leave it fallow and put beans in the south. I was going to plant wheat in the south, he said. Plant beans, she said. Beans put nitrogen back. Wheat takes it out. Beans this season, wheat next, and the north field will be ready again in 2 years. He looked at her. How do you know all this? I told you, she said. I carry it. She looked up at him with a trace of warmth. 7 generations of stormbound farming knowledge, your northern 40 acres, and one stubborn human farmer who should listen to the memory keeper. He pointed a finger at her. You're enjoying this. A little, she admitted. He planted beans in the south field. The growing season advanced, and with it the relationship between Seth and Mazoga advanced with the same patient, rooted energy growing toward the light without hurrying itself, deepening into something more certain with each passing week. They fell into the ease of a couple without discussing it, the small domestic synchronicities of 2 people who know each other's rhythms, the wordless coordination of shared labor, the evenings by the fire where the conversation moved freely between practical and personal and philosophical and back again. He loved watching her read. She had found his father's bookshelf, 3 shelves of mismatched volumes, farming almanacs and a crack-spine copy of the territorial law and 1 novel, battered and water-damaged, that he could never remember the title of, and she had worked through them methodically. And she had also, at some point, produced from her document case a thin volume written in the clan script that she sometimes read in the evenings. And when he asked about it, she said it was a collection of stormbound oral histories that she had transcribed during her time as keeper, and that she was adding to it. You're still recording, he said. A memory keeper never stops, she said, even if the clan is gone. Even if it is only one, she paused. I am also recording new things. What kind of new things? She looked at him with a measured directness. This farm, she said, this winter, the courthouse paper, a pause, you, the warmth that moved through him at that was too large to be called simple. I'm in a stormbound history text, he said. You will be, she said, when there is a next generation to receive it. The words sat between them with a significance neither of them immediately addressed, but neither of them missed. April stretched into May, and the beans were up and the north field was resting, and the farm was looking better than it had in years. Seth hired a day worker from Hobbs Post for the heavier hauling, a broad-shouldered young man named Dix who arrived on the first day with obvious wariness at finding Mazoga there, but who, by the end of the first week, was bringing her wildflower stems from the meadow edge, which he said his mother had told him were good for bringing into the house, and which Mazoga accepted with the gravely amused dignity of someone who understood that people came around if you gave them time and gave them nothing to be afraid of. The trouble with Corvin Dale had not gone away. It had gone quiet, which Seth knew was different. In late May, he heard from a man at the trading post that Dale had been making noise to certain territorial interests about the Stormbound Accord being contestable, and that there was a land syndicate out of the eastern provinces that was interested in the border territory and did not particularly want the Greywater Accord's protections to be valid, because that accord also protected a sizable stretch of river land that the syndicate wanted. This was bigger than one orc woman on one farm. Seth understood that clearly. He wrote to Magistrate Hargrove. Mazoga, when he told her, was quiet for a moment. Then she went to her room and returned with the clan charter. There is something I did not show Hargrove, she said. She unrolled the charter further than she had before, past the boundary agreements, to a separate panel of script written in the smaller, denser clan mark. The Stormbound memory includes the original territorial land grant from the founding accords, 42 years ago. It includes the specific parcels and boundaries that the accord was designed to protect. This is the only surviving copy. She looked at him. If this goes before a real court, this evidence is worth more than anything the syndicate's lawyers can produce. Seth looked at the document. You've been carrying this for a year, and you've been hiding in barns. "I was not hiding," she said with precise dignity. "I was waiting for somewhere worth using it." He looked at her. "And is this somewhere worth using it?" She held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "this is." The legal business moved slowly, as legal business does, but with growing momentum. Magistrate Hargrove turned out to have been waiting for exactly the kind of documentary evidence Mazoga produced. And in July, she presided over a formal hearing in Veldwick at which Seth appeared, and Mazoga appeared with him. The first time she had been in the town openly. And the attention that met them when they rode in on the wagon, Seth on the bench, Mazoga beside him, straight-backed and gold-eyed in the morning light with the clan charter in its leather case across her knees, was the particular attention of a crowd that does not know what it is looking at and is not sure how to react. There were people on the main street who stopped and stared. There were two men outside the tavern who said something that Seth did not fully hear, and Mazoga did hear, and she turned her golden gaze toward them with such a calm, comprehensive expressiveness that they stopped talking. There was a woman with a child on her hip who watched them pass with a face that held open curiosity more than hostility, and when Mazoga caught her eye, the woman nodded slowly, and Mazoga returned the nod. In the courthouse, Corvin Dale sat on one side with a lawyer from the Eastern Province and a sheaf of papers, and Seth and Mazoga sat on the other side with the Stormbound Charter and a copy of the Greywater Accord in Mazoga's memory, which Magistrate Hargrove allowed her to present in full as a certified clan record, which it legally was. Mazoga spoke for 40 minutes. She had the voice of a memory keeper in formal recitation, steady and measured and absolute, each piece of knowledge placed with the precision of someone who had spent their life making sure nothing was lost. She cited dates, names, boundary markers, and the terms of the founding accords verbatim from a document she had memorized so thoroughly she could have recited it blindfolded. The lawyer from the Eastern Province made 3 objections, which Hargrove denied. Corvin Dale stared at the table. When it was over, Hargrove confirmed the Greywater Accord's validity and issued an order protecting the river land parcels and the legal standing of all Stormbound Accord signatories and their designated representatives, which, she noted with a dry precision, included Mazoga Stormbound by virtue of her clankeeper status, which was formally recognized as active even in the absence of the clan itself. Outside the courthouse, Seth and Mazoga stood on the stone steps in the high July sun, and below them on the street a handful of people were watching, and Seth looked at Mazoga and she looked at him, and she was shaking very slightly, not with fear, with something else, something that looked a great deal like the aftermath of a long-held breath finally released. He took her hand on the courthouse steps in full view of everyone on that street and held it, and she looked down at their hands, her green fingers interlaced with his sun-browned ones, and then up at his face. And what was in her expression then was the most open, unguarded thing he had ever seen on her, a joy so clean it hurt to look at. "You won," he said quietly. "We won," she said. They drove home in the late afternoon with the sun long and golden behind the wagon and the meadows running fast with summer green. And somewhere around the 2nd mile, Mazoga leaned her shoulder against his, and he shifted the reins to one hand and put his arm around her, and she fit against his side with the ease of something that had always been meant to be there. And neither of them said anything for a long time, and it was the best silence he had ever sat inside. The summer was the best season the farm had ever had under Seth's care. The bean crop came in strong and full, exactly as Mazoga had predicted, and the rested north field showed signs of recovery already. She built a drying rack along the south wall of the barn for the herb harvest, which was substantial. She had planted a proper medicine garden along the farmhouse's east side in May, using knowledge from the clan's medical memory, and by August it was producing calendula and yarrow and feverfew and 3 varieties of medicinal root that she dried and processed with a methodical expertise. "Are you a healer as well?" Seth asked, watching her work. "Memory keepers hold the medicine knowledge," she said. I am not a trained healer in the way your doctors are, but I know what grew in the stormbound lands and what it was used for, and I know how to prepare it." She paused. "Your calendula tallow, the one you used on my wounds the first morning, where did you learn that preparation?" Seth thought about it. "My grandmother, actually. She traded with a traveling herbalist who passed through this territory when she was young. She wrote the preparation in the margins of her almanac." Mazoga looked at him. "What did the herbalist look like?" "I don't know. Gran just described her as the herb woman from the Northern Territory." Mazoga was quiet for a moment. "The Stormbound traded medicinal knowledge with border territory farmers for 3 generations," she said. "Calendula tallow is a Stormbound preparation. It is in the medical archive." She looked at the herb garden and then at him. "It is possible your grandmother's herbalist was stormbound." The idea moved through Seth slowly and deeply, like water finding its level. He thought about the farm, and his father and his grandmother, and the long chain of people who had held this land and lived on it and been touched, however lightly, by things they might not have had names for. He thought about a morning in early winter with frost on the ground, and a woman against his fence post with gold eyes and an empty knife sheath. "Maybe this place has been waiting for you longer than either of us knew," he said. She looked at him for a moment with her hands still and the summer light all around her. "Maybe," she said softly, and she reached over and brushed the back of his hand with her fingertips and went back to her work. August was long and warm and unhurried, and the evenings were the best part of it, the lingering blue dusk on the porch, the two of them in the mismatched chairs with the day's labor done, and the fireflies beginning in the meadow and the ridge going dark against the sky. They talked about everything, freely and at length, and they argued sometimes, about the best way to repair the south wall's chinking, about whether the roan horse was getting lazy or was genuinely bothered by the flies, about a boundary marker dispute with the neighboring parcel to the west that Seth had been putting off addressing. And the arguments were the good kind, the kind that came from two people who each thought clearly and held their ground and respected that the other did too. And they always resolved, with both of them feeling they'd understood something better than before. He kissed her in the meadow one evening in the 3rd week of August, when they had walked out together at dusk to check the north fence line, and the light was doing that thing it did in late summer, going deep and amber, and somehow both farewell and welcome at once. She had said something about the light, something in the stormbound tongue first, quietly, as she sometimes did when something moved her past the reach of common tongue, and then she translated it for him. A phrase from an old stormbound evening song about the day's long ending and the night's good keeping. He had taken her face in his hands and kissed her in the meadow with the fireflies and the amber light and the far calling of the nightjars, and she had kissed him back with her hands at his waist and her eyes closed, and the translation still soft in the air between them. He loved her. He was not sure there was a morning of the summer that he had not known this, but this was the evening he knew it with his whole body and his whole history, the farm and his father and his grandmother and all the long work of the land, and he understood that love was not separate from the rest of a life but woven through it, the pattern that made the fabric hold. "Mazoga," he said, against her temple. She said, her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat the way she sometimes did, with the focused attention of someone memorizing something important. "Stay," he said. "Not as a farmhand, not because you have nowhere to go. Stay because this is home, because I want it to be yours." She was quiet for a long time. The meadow breathed around them. A nightjar called and was answered. "I have not had a home in a year," she said. "I have been afraid to call anything home because the last time I did, it went." "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. The farm is not going anywhere, and neither are you if you choose to stay." She lifted her head and looked at him. In the last of the amber light, her face was luminous and very serious and very open. "I choose to stay," she said. He kissed her forehead. She pressed her face into his neck. They stood in the meadow until the last light was gone and the stars were out, and then they walked back to the farmhouse together, his arm around her shoulders and hers around his back, and the farm was dark and quiet in theirs, and the door closed behind them. September came with the harvest, and with a change in the texture of things between them. An ease that had grown so deep it had passed through comfort into something more serious and more tender. The ease of people who are building something together and can feel the structure taking shape. The harvest was significant. The bean yield was everything Mazoga had predicted, and Seth was able to settle the smallest of his father's outstanding debts and set aside a solid reserve for the winter, the first time in his 2 years on the farm that the numbers had looked that way. He and Mazoga sat at the table in the evening with the account book open between them and worked through the numbers together, and when they reached the bottom of the column and the reserve total was written and real, Seth set the pen down and looked at it for a moment and felt something release in his shoulders that had been there since before his father died. "This is what it should look like," he said. Mazoga looked at the number. "Next year will be better," she said. "If we rotate the south field back to wheat and plant rye in the east, and if the weather holds." "Next year," Seth said, and the word had a new sound in it, as if next year was a thing he had not quite believed in for a long time and now believed in very much. Mazoga heard it. She looked up. "Yes," she said quietly. "Next year." He reached across the account book and took her hand. The first time they fell asleep together was also in September, the night of the first autumn storm, when the wind came down off the ridge with a fury that rattled the whole house and drove rain against the windows in volleys. Mazoga had come to the doorway of his room some time after midnight to say that her window latch had broken and the shutter was banging, and she could not fix it alone in the dark. Seth got up and fixed it, and by the time it was done they were both thoroughly awake and the storm was at full howl, and it seemed deeply impractical for either of them to go back to cold rooms alone. She did not ask. He did not offer. She simply sat on the edge of his bed and he lay back down, and she lay beside him, and they were both still and careful for a moment, the storm enormous outside and the room warm, and then he turned toward her and put his arm around her, and she settled against him with a long exhale, her back against his chest and his chin at her temple, and the storm went on and they slept. He woke before dawn with her still in his arms and the storm gone and the world outside quietly dripping, and the feeling he had was so complete and so right that it was almost frightening, the feeling of a life that had come into focus. She was awake already, he realized. She usually woke before him, but she had not moved. "You are awake," he said softly. "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you get up?" A pause. "I did not want to yet," she said very quietly. He held her a little tighter. She put her hand over his. October arrived, and with it, a change that neither of them spoke about directly but both of them understood was coming. The way the season changes. Not in one moment, but in the accumulation of moments until suddenly the world is different and you cannot find the exact turning point. The physical closeness between them had been deepening since the first night of the storm, the easy co-sleeping of two people who had found in each other the warmth and safety they had each, for different reasons, been doing without. They had not yet moved beyond holding and kissing and the tender, unspoken conversations of touch, and both of them had been patient with that, letting it be what it was, letting it build. It was in the second week of October, on an evening after the day's work was done and the harvest was in and the farm was going to be all right, that Mazoga came to his room not for warmth and not for the storm, but because she wanted to, and she stood in the doorway and looked at him with those golden eyes in the lamplight, and what was in her look was clear and sure and certain. He crossed the room to her. He put his hands on her face and looked at her. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he had said it, and he had been saving it for exactly this, for a moment when it was fully true and fully earned, and would not be received as anything other than what it was. "I know," she said, with a warmth that was ancient and certain and glad. "I love you, Seth." He kissed her slowly, and she kissed him back with her hands at the front of his shirt, and the lamp burned low, and the night was full of the smell of turned earth and dried herbs and wood smoke, and they came together with the tenderness of two people who have spent a long time learning each other and are now offering everything they have learned. It was quiet and warm and deeply, completely real, not a storm but a tide, not a spark but a long fire banked and tended and now given room to breathe. He held her with his whole self, and she held him with hers, and what was between them was love in its fullest form, trust and want and care and history and home, woven so tight they could not have been separated. Afterward she lay against him in the dark with her ear to his chest, and he held her with one arm around her shoulders and his hand in her hair, and outside the autumn night was wide and full of stars. "Are you all right?" he asked, quiet against her temple. "Yes," she said, "more than all right." A pause. "I am home." November came with the settled beauty of a world putting itself to rest, and Seth and Mazoga moved through it with a peace that had been earned by everything that came before it. The farm was winterized early and well. The medicine garden was harvested, and the pantry was full, and the wood pile was enormous. Mazoga had been splitting through September and October with the particular thoroughness of someone who knew what a bad winter felt like and did not intend to be caught short. In November, a woman came to the farm. Her name was Tara Hobb, the daughter of the man who ran the trading post, and she came alone on a bay mare with a basket of store-bought goods as a gift. She was around Seth's age, dark-haired and practical, and she had the careful directness of someone who had made a decision and was carrying it through. "I want to apologize to you," she said to Mazoga, standing on the porch with the basket in her hands, "for the way this town has behaved. I cannot speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself and say that what happened at the courthouse in July was the most remarkable thing I have seen in years, and I should have said something before now." Mazoga stood in the doorway and studied her for a moment. Then she stepped back. "Come inside," she said. "I have tea on." Seth watched from the barn with a feeling in his chest that he did not try to name because it was too big for a single word. It was something like the world getting bigger and better at the same time. Tara Hobb became the first of what was a slow, imperfect, real kind of acceptance. Not a transformation of the whole town, not a fairy story where prejudice dissolved in one bright moment, but the gradual accumulation of people coming around, one at a time, in their own ways and for their own reasons. The woman with the child who had nodded at them on the courthouse day brought preserves in December and asked Mazoga about the medicine garden. A farmer from the west parcel, Seth's old boundary dispute neighbor, came to ask about crop rotation in January and ended up staying for supper. Magistrate Hargrove sent a formal letter in the new year confirming Mazoga's status and adding, in a handwritten note at the bottom, that she was welcome to correspond directly with the courthouse on any matters concerning the Greywater Accord, as Hargrove was working to have the accord more formally incorporated into territorial law, and a stormbound memory keeper's testimony would be invaluable. Mazoga wrote back that same day, a long, precise, formal letter that she composed at the kitchen table with the firelight and the care of someone who knows that some letters are more than letters, that some letters are the beginning of something the next generation will inherit. The new year turned with snow, and Seth and Mazoga spent it in the warmth of the farmhouse with a good fire and a shared meal, and the quiet, full happiness of two people who have found each other in a hard world and know how rare and precious that finding is. They talked about the spring. They talked about whether to take on a second worker full-time now that the farm was doing well enough to support it. They talked about the documentary archive Mazoga was building from the clan's oral history and whether a formal institution in one of the larger towns might be interested in preserving it. They talked, carefully and honestly, about what they wanted the farm to be in 5 years and in 10. "I want children," Seth said, when the conversation had drifted to the future. He said it looking into the fire, not making it a demand or a question, just putting it on the table the way he put everything on the table between them, honestly and without decoration. Mazoga was quiet for a moment. He turned to look at her. "Half-orc children," she said. They will not have an easy time of it. No easier or harder than any child born to a world that has to be convinced to be decent, Seth said, and they'll have two parents who know how to hold their ground. She looked at him for a long time, and then she said, "Yes, I want that too." Spring came early that second year, earlier than either of them expected, a warm front rolling in off the southern coast in late February and turning the iron-hard ground soft before the calendar said it had permission to. The plowing started early and the planting followed, and the farm moved into its second full season with Mazoga's knowledge in it. And the difference from the first year Seth had farmed alone was the difference between a man holding a thing together and a home growing. In March, Seth built an extension on the east side of the farmhouse. It was not large, a single room with a good window and a door that opened into the herb garden, but he built it with care, the way he built everything, choosing his timber with attention and setting his joinery true, and Mazoga worked beside him on it, and her work was as true as his. When it was done, it was for a purpose neither of them had stated aloud yet, but both of them understood. It was in April, with the extension finished and the beans in the ground and the world green and loud with bird call and running water, that Seth Yates stood in the kitchen of his farmhouse, their farmhouse, and said, "I want to marry you." Mazoga turned from the washstand where she was filling the morning water pot. She looked at him. "You are certain," she said. "As certain as I have ever been about anything," he said. He had thought about this carefully. He was not impulsive. But he had been thinking about it since October, and in the months between then and now, his certainty had only increased, reinforcing itself with every morning waking beside her and every evening at the table, and every shared hour of labor and every conversation and every argument and every kiss, and every time she put her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat as if it was the most important sound in the world. "The territory law may not recognize," she started. "There's a provision in the Greywater Accord," he said. "I found it 2 months ago. Mazoga, I did my reading." She stared at him. Then she put the water pot down. "You have been planning this," she said. "I've been making sure I could offer it properly," he said. "There's a difference." She crossed the kitchen to him in 3 long strides and took his face in her hands and kissed him with a fervor that knocked him back 1 step, and then he held his ground and kissed her back with everything he had, and when they broke apart both of them were breathing unevenly. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." The wedding was simple and completely theirs. Magistrate Hargrove came out to the farm on a Thursday in May with a registry book and 2 witnesses, Tara Hobb and Dix the day worker, who had become a permanent hire by this point, and who showed up with wildflowers for Mazoga's hair with the particular earnest sweetness of a young man who was very glad to be included. The ceremony was brief and legal and binding, spoken on the farmhouse porch in the May morning light, and it incorporated one element that was Seth's idea. He asked Mazoga to say the marriage promise in Stormbound tongue first, so that the record would carry both languages, so that it would be, as she would say, proper, held in both traditions and lost to neither. She said it in the Stormbound tongue with her hands holding both of his and her gold eyes steady and full, and the sound of it, old and ceremonial and alive in the morning air, was the most beautiful sound Seth had ever heard. Hargrove wiped her spectacles afterward, which she claimed was dust. Tara Hobb was not trying to pretend she wasn't crying. Dix dropped the wildflowers. The first year of their marriage settled over the farm like a long, generous summer that lasted past its season. Mazoga began corresponding regularly with Magistrate Hargrove on the Greywater Accord Preservation Project, and in the autumn of their marriage year, she was formally invited to present the Stormbound records to a territorial historical commission in a city 2 days' ride east. Seth went with her, and they stayed in a proper inn for 2 nights, a luxury neither of them was entirely comfortable with, but that Mazoga managed with the impeccable dignity she brought to everything. And she presented the clan archive before a small panel of scholars and legal officials with the full authority of someone who had been carrying this knowledge her entire adult life, and was finally giving it the audience it deserved. On the second evening, in the inn's small dining room, a man from the commission, a gray-bearded scholar named Aldrich, leaned across the table and said to Mazoga, "You are the last stormbound memory keeper." "Yes," she said. "Then this collection is irreplaceable." "Everything I carry is irreplaceable," she said. "That has always been the weight of it." Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. "I would like to arrange for a full transcription," he said. "Properly funded, properly archived. Your words, your languages, your knowledge, preserved in the Commission's collection and at the Territorial Library." He paused. "With your name on it. The Stormbound Archive, recorded and presented by Mazoga Stormbound Yates." She looked at him, then she looked at Seth. Seth had his hand on the table and she put hers over it. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." They drove home 2 days later under a sky enormous with stars, wrapped in a shared blanket on the wagon bench, the horses moving at a comfortable walk on the road home through the dark border territory. Mazoga's head was on his shoulder and the archive, still in its leather case, but now contracted to be copied and preserved permanently, was in the bag behind the seat. "How do you feel?" Seth asked. "Like I put something down that I have been carrying for a very long time," she said. "And like I can keep carrying it now because it does not weigh the same when it has somewhere to land." He kissed her temple. "You're not alone with it anymore." "No," she agreed, "I am not." In the spring of the second year of their marriage, Mazoga told him she was expecting. She told him simply and directly as she told him everything, early in the morning when they were both still in bed in the gray-blue pre-dawn, and he lay still for a moment absorbing it, and then he put his arm around her and held her with everything he had, and she lay against his chest and let him. "Are you frightened?" she asked. "A little," he said honestly. "Are you?" "Yes," she said. "But I have been frightened before and come through it." "We'll come through this together," he said. "I know," she said. "I am counting on it." The pregnancy was not easy in its first months. Mazoga was sick in the mornings with the particular persistence of a woman whose body was doing an enormous thing and not pretending otherwise, and she approached it with the grim practicality with which she approached all difficult things, refusing to be incapacitated by it, but also not pretending it was nothing. Seth learned very quickly which preparations from the medicine garden helped and which didn't, and he made them every morning without being asked, and he carried the things that were too heavy without making a point of it, and he stayed close enough to be useful without making her feel watched. Tara Hobb came by twice a week and helped with the herb processing and the housework without any of the awkward delicacy of pity, just the practical friendship of a woman who knew what was needed and did it. The farm went on. The crops went in. The roan horse recovered her energy once the flies eased up in late May. Dix rechinked the south wall properly at last, a task Seth had been threatening to do for 3 years, and he did it well, and the draft that had persisted through 2 winters was finally sealed out. In the deep of summer, with the south field full and the north field showing the full benefit of 2 years' rotation, thick and dark and ready, the baby came. He came early in the morning, the way Seth always woke, as if he already knew the rhythm of the farm. He was small and perfect and green as new leaves, with wide, curious eyes that could not yet decide between his mother's gold and his father's brown. And he had the strong, square jaw of the Stormbound line and the wide hands of the Yates line, and he was the most astonishing thing Seth had ever seen. Seth held his son in the morning light coming through the bedroom window and felt the entire history of the farm, all the loneliness and the grinding work and the fear of loss, resolve itself into this moment, this weight in his arms, this small, strong, loud new person beginning. Mazoga lay back against the pillows, exhausted and radiant, watching Seth with her son. "He is remarkable," Seth said, in the voice of a man whose vocabulary has temporarily failed him. "He is loud," said Mazoga, with a warmth so enormous it could have lit the room. "What do we name him?" She had been thinking about this for months. She said, "Roan Stormbound Yates. Roan for the horse that has been your most reliable thing since before I came. Stormbound for the clan he carries." Yates for the father he is lucky to have." Seth looked at her over their son's head with an expression he could not control, something full and undone and grateful beyond the reach of any clean word, and Mazoga reached up and put her hand against his face, gentle and sure. "You gave me a home," she said. "I am giving you this." He covered her hand with his. The years that followed had the quality of things that are exactly what they were meant to be, not without hardship. Because no life on a border farm is without hardship, and no life in a world still learning to extend its decency is without moments that require you to hold your ground. There were people who never came around, and there were seasons that went badly, and there was a February when the roof over the new East Room gave way under the weight of a freak snowfall, and they spent 2 weeks with buckets and a borrowed tarpaulin until Seth could get to the timber. There was a summer drought that hit the North Field hard despite everything Mazoga knew about soil management, and that autumn was lean and required careful rationing, but they rationed with skill and without panic and came through it. And there were the other things, the growing evenings on the porch with Roan learning to walk in the farmyard with the terrifying confidence of toddlers, and then with Roan and 2 years later with his sister, Ember, a girl with her father's brown eyes and her mother's green skin, and a personality of such determined independence that both her parents spent equal parts delighted and exhausted by it. There were the slow changes in Veldwick, the accumulation of relationship and trust, and the ordinary friction and resolution of a community deciding who it was going to be. Magistrate Hargrove retired and was replaced by a younger man who had read the Greywater Accord and considered it foundational. Tara Hobbs' family's trading post expanded, and she brought in a second employee who was, without particular announcement, an Orc man from the Eastern Territory who turned out to be remarkably good at inventory, and who was treated with the matter-of-fact decency of a business where that was simply the standard. The Stormbound archive was completed and formally housed in the Territorial Library, and a scholar traveled from the Eastern capital to study it, and wrote a monograph on its contents that Mazoga read with the careful, critical eye of someone who knows the subject better than anyone alive, and who was entirely prepared to write a corrective correspondence, which she did, and which was received with great appreciation. On a morning in the 7th year of their marriage, Seth stood at the north fence line fully repaired, properly strung, nothing like the thing Mazoga had leaned against in the frost, and looked at the farm. He could see the full extent of it from here, the 4 fields in their rotation, the farmhouse with its addition, the barn with the double-wide door they had hung last spring, the herb garden along the east wall still green in the autumn cold, the smoke from the chimney rising straight in the still air. He could see Mazoga in the south field with Roan, teaching him something about the soil. He was 5 now and deeply serious about farming in the way small children are serious about whatever their parents find important, and the sight of them crouched together over a fistful of earth was the kind of thing that made Seth's chest feel almost too full. She looked up and saw him watching. Even from this distance, the gold of her eyes caught the morning light. He raised a hand. She raised a hand back. He stood at the fence line of his farm, their farm on the edge of the Ashveil Territory, with the ridge at his back and the fields before him and the chimney smoke rising and his family in the south field, and he understood, with the complete, rooted certainty of a man who has built something and watched it become real, that this was what a life was supposed to feel like. Not the absence of hardship, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something worth all of it, a love that had started with a frost-cold morning and a woman against a fence post and a bowl of porridge and a decision made quietly and without fuss, in the way the best decisions usually are, to be decent, to offer shelter, to hold his ground. He picked up his tools and walked back toward the farmhouse, toward the smoke and the warmth and the voices, toward Mazoga, who was now standing from the crouch and brushing soil from her hands, and saying something to Roan that made the boy's face go bright with the particular delight of children who have just been told something wonderful about the world. She looked up as Seth crossed the field to them, and the look on her face was everything, the gold-lit warmth of it, the deep, settled love of someone who has found her home and knows it and is not afraid of knowing it, the quiet, fierce joy of a memory keeper who has, at last, found something worth keeping. He reached her and put his arm around her, and she leaned into him with the ease of 7 years of mornings, and Roan attached himself to his father's leg with the barnacle tenacity of a 5-year-old who wants to be included in everything. And from the farmhouse, the faint sound of Ember's voice came through the open window, imperiously requesting something in the clear, carrying tone of a 2-year-old who considers the world her audience. "She is going to be trouble," Mazoga said comfortably. "She is already trouble," Seth said. "She gets it from you," Mazoga said. "She gets it from you," Seth said, and Mazoga made the low sound that was her laugh, the one that had taken him months to hear the first time and that he had been collecting ever since. He held her in the south field with the autumn light long and warm around them, and the farm breathed, and the ridge watched over them, and the world was exactly as wide and hard and beautiful as it had always been, and they were in it together, which made all the difference. Mazoga Stormbound Yates, memory keeper, last of the Stormbound line, first of a new one, pressed her face against her husband's neck and breathed him in, and thought of all the things she carried, the old words, the boundary agreements, the medicine knowledge, the songs of the dead, and thought of all the new things she had added to the record in the years since a frost-dark morning when she had run out of road and found, against every expectation, a fence post and a man and a beginning. She would write it all down tonight, as she did every night. The farm, the fields, the children, the morning light on the ridge. The way Seth had stood between her and Corvindale's horses without a second thought. The courthouse steps and the held hand in front of a watching town. The first kiss by the fire with the stamped paper still warm from his pocket. The meadow and the fireflies and the amber light and the evening song. All of it, in both languages, in the clear and careful script of a woman who knew that the things worth keeping must be held with both hands. She would write it all down, and it would live as long as the words did, and the words would live in the archive, in the territorial library, and in the mouths of her children, and in the land itself, which remembered everything. The farm needed a hand. She had needed a reason to stay. It had turned out to be the same reason. It had turned out to be him.